Welcome to another edition of How to Argue for Statism. Once again, I want statists to put their best foot forward to try and come up with actual arguments in favor of the state and against libertarianism. Because remember, as we've already established, if you're a statist, the burden of proof is on you. This video is based on a debate primer from Lord T. Hawkeye, and once again I've expanded on it and provided more detail. And this is simply a list of things you should not do when trying to debate someone. And it isn't meant to be comprehensive, but it does cover some of the most common fallacies people use when trying to defend the state. 1. Special pleading. X is true, but Y is exempt just because. We talked about this in part 1. Special pleading is stating a principle or proposition and then making an exception to it for no valid reason. The first thing you need to understand about logic and argumentative principles is that consistency is paramount. This is covered with basic logic. Consistency is preferable to inconsistency may seem like an unsupported assertion, but what's the alternative? Inconsistency is preferable to consistency, which is a consistent principle and therefore self-contradictory. Consistency is preferable to inconsistency is therefore the only position that doesn't leave you in a logical quagmire. Statists are notorious for this. Just about every single argument they make, they exempt the government from it and refuse to offer any explanation as to why, no matter how much they are pressed. Like when we compare government to the mafia. The mob comes around extorting protection money. Pay us and we'll protect you. Don't pay us and we'll do bad things to you. How is this any different from the government? If you don't pay your taxes, government will do bad things to you. They'll haul you into court, you'll go to prison, and if you resist, bang! Statists try to give the answer that we get services for the taxes we pay. But the same thing can be said of the mob. If armed thugs come by threatening you, you just call your local mob boss and he sends his goons over and takes care of them. This is our territory. He's under our protection, understand? Same if a bunch of teenage vandals wreck your place, and all along they'll be saying, "See how great it is with mafia protection?" Around this point, the statist will drag out the tired old social contract. You agreed to it because you can leave. But you can leave mafia territory too, can't you? In fact, you can go to many places where the mob doesn't have control, but there's nowhere left on the planet that isn't under the oppressive thumb of some kind of state to some degree. Then, in desperation, they'll cry out, "But you can vote!" Yes, vote by choosing only from the candidates the state mob allows. And when in 2012, congressional approval was down to 10%, but 90% of incumbents got reelected, this is not in any way valid. The fact is, you have no argument for the legitimacy of the state that doesn't also apply to the mob. And in remembering part 1 of this series, remember that you can't play the hypocrite card. A libertarian is no more a hypocrite for driving on the roads he was never given a choice in paying for than our hypothetical person is to call the mob whenever he's threatened or attacked. He can even be glad the mob showed up to take care of it at the time. That does not excuse the immorality of the mob forcing him into the arrangement to begin with. He's forced into it. He wasn't given a choice. And so he can hardly be called a hypocrite just for insisting that the other side live up to their side of the bargain. You have no basis for saying it's wrong for the mob to do it, but okay for the state. If you can make an exception to a rule whenever you like without having to justify it, then it's not a rule in the first place. You're effectively saying X is true except when I say it isn't, which proves nothing. 2. Ad hominem. Your claim is false because I call your character into question. Okay, first off, stop accusing people of ad hominem attacks when they give you a justly deserved insult. Insulting someone is not an ad hominem. Ad hominem is not, "You're wrong, therefore you're an idiot." It's, "You're an idiot, therefore you're wrong." In other words, your status as an idiot is used to try to disprove the point. There's no low that statists won't sink to here. They often try to paint the other side as racist or misogynist or whatever. They attack the person's religious or political beliefs, their backgrounds, their careers, anything they can find. I've had all of these done to me and more, and so have most other libertarians. It's pretty much one of the first plays in the statist playbook. And the thing is, this character trait doesn't have to be false. It doesn't even have to be a negative characteristic. I've had feminists tell me my opinion is invalid because I'm a cis white male. It's true. I'm not transgendered, I'm white, and I'm male. And there's nothing wrong with that, any more than there's anything wrong with being transgendered or female or black or Latino or Asian or polka-dotted. Well, okay, polka-dotted might mean a medical condition that needs to be checked out, but the point is, what does that have to do with the argument? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. Resorting to it is one of the biggest cop-outs you can make. These can be encapsulated into zombie words. Racist, misogynist, neo-Confederate. Words that are just slung around with no basis whatsoever, but can be effective in making onlookers reluctant to check out the argument. Another such phrase is, check your privilege. But what does that even mean? Checking my privilege must mean that I have some sort of bias or blind spot regarding the argument. But if that were the case, you could just point that out, and you wouldn't even need the phrase check your privilege to begin with. This phrase seems to speak to another variant of ad hominem. You're biased, therefore you're wrong. Not only are claims of bias blatantly hypocritical, everyone without exception is biased, so what's your point? While bias is often a reason why a person is wrong, it is not itself proof that they are. Only errors in logic or empiricism can determine that. So if you look at a study that concludes that global warming is false and see it's funded by the Koch brothers, I'm sorry, but you do not get the shorthand of saying, Koch funded, and get to dismiss it out of hand. Studies are wrong because of bad data or methodology, and must be examined on that basis. Once you show that the study is flawed, then you can point to bias as a possible reason why. Now, a history of bias does go to the credibility of a source, but there's a difference. If studies funded by the Koch brothers have a history of being significantly more flawed than other studies on those subjects, then that might legitimately lead you to saying, well, that's a Koch-funded study, and they generally aren't reliable. I'm going to skip it and try to find something more credible. That's okay. You can do that. What you cannot do is say, it's Koch-funded, therefore it must be wrong, or use its status as a Koch-funded study as a refutation when it's presented to you. All of this is irrelevant to the strength of a study, which should be based on its likelihood ratio. The factors that make the study credible increase the numerator, and the factors that make it flawed increase the denominator. At no point does whoever funded it come into play, and it acts on the prior probability of the subject itself, in this case global warming, and not the prior probability of a Koch-funded study being valid. Get it now? Ad hominem attacks are wrong because they're a distraction from the actual matter at hand. The character of the person making the claim is utterly irrelevant. If Hitler says 2 + 2 = 4, you may not like him, but he is right. 3. Poisoning the well. Don't listen to that guy. He's a racist, misogynist, whatever. This is kind of like an ad hominem in advance. You ridicule someone or attack his character or whatever before he makes his argument, and thus make it so that people are less likely to take him seriously. Like the ad hominem attack, the message being sent is that this person cannot be relied on to make valid arguments. It's wrong for all the same reasons that ad hominem attacks are wrong. This can also be done by strawmanning the position. Libertarianism is the idea that the rich get to benefit at the expense of the poor. Now, everything said by the libertarian will be interpreted by the listener in this context, unless he's aware of the fallacy and works to counter it in his mind. In fact, most strawman arguments are a form of poisoning the well. 4. Appeal to popularity. X is true because the majority agrees with it. Appeal to popularity is declaring something true based on how many people believe it to be true. Statists do this all the time. It's what the people want. A majority approve. They all voted for it. Sorry, but democracy is not a path to truth. Slavery wasn't right back when most people agreed with it. Drawing and quartering heretics wasn't right back when most people agreed with it. It doesn't matter how many people you can get to agree with you. If 10 million people say 2 + 2 = 5, they're still wrong. And in the case of voting, it makes even less sense. People don't vote for issues, they vote for politicians. Politicians they end up disapproving of. It's complete nonsense, and so you'll never get anywhere with us when you try this. 5. Argument from authority. X is true because John Q. Expert says it is. This is similar to appeal to popularity, only replace the majority with an expert or authority figure. Sometimes you have both. the authority is the president or prime minister or whoever, and he's the duly elected leader of the people. Here's the thing. Even if the authority figure is well versed in the field, that doesn't mean he's exempt from having to back up his statements. A lot of people say this isn't a fallacy when the person is an actual expert in the field. This is just wrong. If Richard Dawkins makes a statement about biology, he is expected to provide evidence just like the rest of us. Now, as with the bias issue, someone with Dawkins' credibility has high priors when he speaks. Dawkins is much more likely to be right about biology than Kent Hovind, for example, but it's still entirely possible for Dawkins to make a statement that is factually incorrect, even about biology. You also have a potential problem here: dueling authorities. The Harvard-Smithsonian Center for Astrophysicists is a world-renowned, well-respected institution of experts in astrophysics. So is the International Astronomical Union. The former says Pluto is a planet. The latter says it's not. So whom do we believe? Even though they're both experts, both proper and legitimate authorities, they can't both be right. Now, when someone is presented as an authority in a field when he has no actual expertise, that's called argument from non-authority. So-and-so worked at NASA for 12 years and he believes in creationism. Yeah? So what did he do there? Sweep the floors? Worked at NASA does not make one a proper authority, and even if it did, the argument from authority fallacy would still apply. You also have argument from anonymous authority. Studies show that experts say, "I once heard a scientist," or even just the ambiguous and mysterious they. They say. Argument from anonymous authority is little more than rumor mongering. One of my personal favorites is argument from self-authority. Usually after several posts, when the person has demonstrated that he doesn't know the first thing about a subject and has been solidly schooled, he'll try to save face with, "Listen, I've been an expert on this for over 20 years. Oh? Care to link us to your CV? Didn't think so. An interesting variation on this one is argumentum ad verecundium, or argument to shame. Basically, how dare a know-nothing on the internet like you oppose these fine scholars? So if a libertarian refutes some bit of nonsense that Paul Krugman came up with, and the statist responds with, "Yeah? Well, he has a Nobel Prize. Who the hell are you? Shut up and listen to your betters," then he's employing argumentum ad verecundium. Argument from authority is often combined with argumentum ad populum. Wise men throughout the ages have used acupuncture, or even combined with argumentum ad verecundium. How dare you go against the will of the people? Argument from authority, argumentum ad populum, argumentum ad verecundium. All forms of these are invalid because they take advantage of the Asch effect. Solomon Asch performed a number of experiments on conformity where he asked people obvious questions like, is line A longer than line B, or which of these squares is blue? But only one of the participants was the test subject. The rest were Confederates who were instructed to all give the same obviously wrong answer. 75% of subjects gave a wrong answer to at least one question, going along with the others instead of what they knew was right. The overall conformity rate was about 1/3. The number went up when the others were presented as authorities or members of the in-group. These fallacies, whether separately or together, all exploit this basic human weakness. 6. Circular reasoning. X is true because Y is true, and Y is true because X is true. Circular reasoning is attempting to offer proof that a claim is true, but the proof already presupposes that it's true beforehand. Confused? Let me give a very popular example. The Bible is true because it's the Word of God. But how do we know it's the Word of God? Because the Bible says so. My favorite example is the social contract argument. The social contract is valid because it's the law, and the law is valid because of the social contract. This can have more subtle variations. We need more state power to rein in corporations because corporations abuse state power. If they attack us, there'll be war, and war would be bad, so we need to attack them first. If we don't have a state, we'll all be controlled, so we need a state to control us. How about this one? How dare you criticize the state? The state's military fought and died so you could have the right to complain about them. So they fought and died for us to have the right, and that means we can't exercise it? Huh? And aren't you the ones dishonoring the soldiers by stopping me from exercising the very right that, according to you, they wanted me to have desperately enough to die for? A related fallacy is begging the question, if drugs weren't bad, they wouldn't be prohibited by law. Remember this bit from Richard Nixon? If the president does it, that means that it is not illegal. The problem with circular reasoning is that you've skipped the step of having to back up your claim. You've acted as though it already were true, and then turned around and offered that as proof that it's true. Sneaky, but not in any way valid. As they said in Doctor Who, circular logic only gets you dizzy. 7. Unfalsifiability. If X, then Y. If not Y, then still X. If you want to be rational, or for that matter if you want to be honest, you have to construct your arguments in a way that makes it at least theoretically possible that they can be proven wrong. You may recall, tide goes in, tide goes out, you can't explain it. When people explained that tides were caused by the moon, this same person replied, alright, how'd the moon get there? Of course, we have a really good explanation for that, but all he has to do is keep pushing it back step after step. Carl Sagan identified this fallacy by positing he had a dragon in his garage. Okay, let me see it. Well, it's invisible. I'll listen for it. It's inaudible. I'll put flour on the floor and catch its footprints. It constantly hovers. I'll get a thermal camera and observe its fire. It only breathes invisible cold fire. I'll spray paint it then. It's impermeable to paint. Get it? There's no conceivable way to prove the dragon isn't there. Implied in this is a shifting of the burden of proof. It's not up to him to prove the dragon's there, it's up to you to prove that it isn't. But this goes beyond that. It not only assumes that the dragon is there, it constantly redefines the dragon in a way that there's no real way to test for its existence. Now, no one's questioning the existence of the state, but we are questioning the special status that statists give to it. And as the side wanting to use force, the burden of proof is on the statists. Yet time and time again, you make your claims about the state unfalsifiable. We show you how much better off things are with capitalism, and you come back with, but Australia has Social Security. We show you private roads being run better than government roads, and you come back with, but they're still funded and managed by government. As if the government roads aren't. So why are they worse again? We show you someone developing modern rocketry without the help of government, and even being mocked and shunned by government the whole time, and you come back with, but he got one $5,000 grant from the Smithsonian decades earlier. Every time entrepreneurs make people's lives better, your holy priests cry, you didn't build that, somebody else made that happen. And on the other hand, we point out how government ruined the economy with the Great Depression, and you blame it on the gold standard. We point out how government policy led to the tech bubble and the housing crisis, and you blame it on the free market. You blame the free market for healthcare when government has been managing it for half a century now. In fact, the most regulated industries in the country are healthcare and finance, and yet their problems are due to the free market. The least regulated is computers and the internet, and of course they're by far the most successful, but that's all thanks to government. This is the dragon in Carl Sagan's garage, nothing more. You automatically set it up so that government's contributions, no matter how small, get all the credit, and yet no matter how much government meddles, it gets none of the blame. Really, you people have nothing at all to say to creationists or moon hoaxers. 8. Nirvana Fallacy. X is not perfect, therefore it's worthless. The Nirvana Fallacy is attempting to discredit an idea by comparing it to a completely unrealistic ideal. Now, this isn't the same as pointing out genuine problems, like the fundamental immorality of government taxation, or the fact that universal healthcare relies on rationing, or that politicians and bureaucrats never spend money as efficiently as those who actually made it. No, the Nirvana Fallacy is where you pick any problem, no matter how small or unlikely, and pretend that this completely destroys the other side, when your side isn't any better, and is even definitively worse. So we talk about how much better private property would be handled in a free market. You come back with crazy stories about someone buying up the property surrounding you 360 degrees and closing you in. We show actual empirical data showing things are better with government, and you come back with lifeboat scenarios. You look for any tiny speck in the free market's eye, even if you have to invent it, while ignoring the enormous sequoia tree in governments. Folks, nothing is perfect, and it's ridiculous to expect it. the Nirvana Fallacy is nothing more than holding your opponent to a higher standard than what you hold to yourself. Notice that any of us could come up with crazy extreme scenarios showing your government being horrible, but we don't have to, since we have plenty of real-world data to draw on. So the only reason for the Nirvana Fallacy and lifeboat scenarios and crazy unlikely hypotheticals is to draw attention away from the very real flaws on your side. Besides, if we followed the idea of anything not perfect is useless, we'd never get anything done. As I said many times, if you want guarantees, you've got yourself born into the wrong universe. If anything, it's statism that promises perfection and solutions to every problem, and it absolutely cannot come anywhere close to living up to those promises. Which, by the way, also means that you don't get to claim libertarianism is utopian, you hypocrite. 9. Turn back the clock fallacy. X is from a certain era. Y is also from that era. Therefore, if you want X, you must want Y too. Here's an example. You think the economy was better in the 1950s? You must want segregation back. Or, look at how horrible people's lives were in the 19th century. You really want to go back to that? The economic policy that led to the Great Prosperity had nothing at all to do with segregation. In fact, economic theory tells us that we're less prosperous with segregation. The prosperity happened in spite of segregation, not because of it. Besides, segregation was due solely to the actions of government with the Jim Crow law, so stop blaming the free market for it, you hypocrites! It's also not the case that re-implementing an old policy means giving up all the innovations we've made since then. We look at 19th century America because the economic conditions of the poor and working class improved at a rate far greater than at any other time in history. It's the rate of increase that's important. So no, we don't want to go back to long hours working in buildings without air conditioning, and that's not what this policy would result in. The policy would move us forward from where we are at an even greater rate. But that you have no answer to, so you have to try and discredit it some other way. This is the essence of the turn back the clock fallacy. Let's round it out to an even 10. 10. Argument of convenience. X is true, but only when it works in my favor. This is pretty self-explanatory, making an argument you obviously would never accept yourself if the situation were reversed. My personal favorite is state worshippers who resort to the old love it or leave it argument when defending immoral state actions, a position they wouldn't consider the least bit reasonable if they were the ones being victimized. We get this all the time from statists. We complain about the foreign wars, or the war on drugs, or NSA spying, or exorbitant taxes, and they reply, "Tough! We have a social contract. If you don't like it, leave." Yet someone says a prayer before Congress convenes and they throw a snit fit. So here's the question. You hate libertarianism so much. What would you do if libertarians got into power and reduced government down to its nuts and bolts and made this country a free market, or even an anarcho-capitalist society? Haven't you agreed to that by not moving away? Remember, you can't have different rules for your side than the other. Also, think of how one-sided this is. There aren't any places in the world we can go to without government, and you know this because you repeatedly bleat on about how a libertarian society has never been tried, and in the next breath blame libertarianism for everything bad that's happened. If you want universal health care, if you want a police state, if you want a managed economy, you have lots of places you can go. But a lot of people came to this continent to create the one place where people could be free. And big government statists never even let it have a chance. Our Constitution didn't even make it past the first president without hideous violations. I really want to know this. If you like big government, why don't you move? There are plenty of places you can go. Really, what is the big deal with letting us have just this one place in the world where we can go to be free? What are you so afraid of? That's the thing about principles, folks. They work both ways. If you preach something you wouldn't accept yourself, yet expect others to accept it unconditionally from you, that not only displays immaturity and lack of principles on your part, it is also arrogant, closed-minded, and presumptuous. Integrity is important if you want your ideas taken seriously. You can practice what you preach and be wrong, but you can never be right if you don't practice what you preach.